Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 9 of the Stupendous Dodgeball Fiasco. When we left off at the end of part 8, Philip and Sam were just getting settled in the courtroom as the judge entered for the trial to begin. So their lawsuit against the American Dodgeball Company, the city of Hardingtown, against Coach and BB and everything else is just about to begin. So let's see what happens. Boffo, the three-legged circus poodle, lost his leg in a bicycle accident, and they said he would never ride again. The leg was buried behind the ticket tent. Each day, Boffo would dig holes around the tent trying to find his leg. Each evening, the circus moved to another town. Boffo never did find his leg. But his other legs became so strong from all that digging, he was able to start riding again. Whenever a situation seemed hopeless, Philip's mom would remind him about Boffo. Philip was thinking about Boffo as Judge Mon entered the courtroom in a swirl of black robes. A judge is like a referee, Sam had explained. Her job is to make sure people play by the rules and don't misbehave in the courtroom. Philip thought Judge Mon's black robe made her look more like the Grim Reaper than a referee. She had silver hair and a neutral expression. The judge surveyed her courtroom like it was a soccer field and tossed herself into her chair. Everyone else sat. "Let's get this hearing started," said Judge Mon. "Are there any matters to be dealt with before we begin?" Mr. Dinkle rushed to a podium. Although his hair was also gray, his step seemed quite lively. Philip wondered if Mr. Dinkle colored his hair to make himself look older. "Good morning, Your Honor," Mr. Dinkle said. "The defense would like to present this motion to disqualify opposing counsel." Philip looked to Sam for a translation. "They want the judge to tell me I can't be your lawyer," Sam whispered to Philip. "Can they do that?" Philip asked. But Sam had already stood up. He buttoned the jacket of his tailor-made suit. "Stop dragging your feet," Judge Mon said to Mr. Dinkle, "and tell me why." "Conflict of interest, Your Honor," said Mr. Dinkle. "Yesterday we hired Mr. Phoenix's son to work for our new law firm. A lawyer shouldn't try a case when a close relative works for the law firm on the other side." "Of all the low-down tricks," said Sam, "the only reason you hired him was so you could try to get me disqualified." Sam and Mr. Dinkle began arguing. Philip wished they would stick to the facts about how B.B. Tyson broke his glasses. What would he do if the judge wouldn't let Sam try the case? Philip remembered something he had read in a law book. He needed to get Sam's attention, but there were no salt and pepper shakers for their secret signal. Philip picked up the drinking glasses. "If Mr. Stanislaw cannot find replacement counsel," said Mr. Dinkle, "he'll have to withdraw his lawsuit." Philip banged the glasses together and they made a loud cling, cling, cling. "What is that annoying sound?" asked Judge Mon. "I believe," said Sam, "my client's signaling he wishes to speak." Philip stood up and cleared his voice so that his words wouldn't sound too squeaky. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I'd like to know if it would solve the problem if I had another lawyer." "Well, of course," said Judge Mon. "That's the whole reason I've been hearing arguments. Do you have another lawyer?" "Yes, ma'am," said Philip. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a feather drop. Philip's knees wobbled. He wasn't sure if he could force out the words. "Well, don't let the grass grow under your feet," said Judge Mon. "Out with it. Who's this lawyer?" "Myself, ma'am," Philip said, trying to sound certain. "I would like to represent myself." A hum like the static from a broken speaker crept through the room. Judge Mon beat her gavel against her mahogany desk. "Objection!" The three dodgeball defense lawyers screamed in unison as they sprang from their seats. "He can't practice law without a license," Mr. Dinkle said. "That's not true. You only need a license when you represent another person," said Sam. "The Constitution of the United States ensures the right of a party to a lawsuit to represent himself." The lawyers began bickering again. Philip hit the glasses together until they stopped. Judge Mon uncovered her ears and ordered the tipstaff to remove the glasses from Philip's table. "Young man," Judge Mon said to Philip, "if you wish to address this court, you will do so like the other attorneys. You'll rise from your seat, say the word objection, and wait for this court to recognize you." Philip didn't understand why the law had so many strange rules. When he was in the law library, he found a whole book about odd laws. There was one that made it illegal to carry an ice cream cone in your pocket in parts of Kentucky, to sleep on a refrigerator in Pittsburgh, and illegal to walk across the street on your hands in Connecticut. Still, he wasn't about to argue with the judge. "Yes, Your Honor," said Philip. He stood up and adjusted his pants down a little at the waist so he wouldn't get a wedgie. "It seems to me," Philip said, "that if the Constitution says I can represent myself, and Mr. Dinkle says I can't, then the Constitution should win." "This is ridiculous," Mr. Dinkle said. "Your Honor, the boy is only 11 years old." "That's true," Philip said, "but do you have a legal case that says an 11-year-old can't be his own lawyer?" The judge looked over at Mr. Dinkle. "He's got you there, doesn't he?" said Sam. Mr. Dinkle folded his arms against his chest in a dramatic display of exasperation. Judge Mon leaned back in her chair and rocked. "You consider yourself a bit of a rabble-rouser, don't you, son?" she asked Philip. "No, I just like to read." "You don't know what kind of trouble you're asking for when you say you want to represent yourself," said Judge Mon. "Do you?" "Probably not," Philip admitted. "I ought to let you go ahead in order just to teach you a lesson," she said. "Well, thank you," said Philip. "Please let me know if I'm making any mistakes." "Oh, I'm sure Mr. Dinkle will keep you well informed on that front." "Yes, indeed," said Mr. Dinkle. "In fact, after further consideration, the defendants wish to withdraw their objection. If Mr. Stanislaw wishes to represent himself, we would be delighted." The three lawyers began to snicker. "The objection having been withdrawn," ruled Judge Mon, "this court will permit Mr. Stanislaw to represent himself." When the gavel hit, a news photographer stood up and a flash went off in Philip's direction. Muffled clapping snuck from the last row of spectator seating. Philip looked back and saw Sean and his cousin smile. Philip felt like smiling too. That is, until he heard Judge Mon say, "Mr. Stanislaw, you may call your first witness." Bruno's nightmare is a complicated three-person juggling pattern sometimes used in circus acts. Philip's nightmare was suddenly realizing he was in charge of his lawsuit and had no idea what to do next. "Now what?" Philip whispered to his friend. Sam ruffled through a box of file folders with braille-coated edges. He handed Philip a thick document titled Plaintiff's Trial Memorandum. "Find the page that says Witness List," Sam instructed him. Philip found it and read the first name. "My first witness is Marvin Nerp," he announced to the judge. A puny man in a brown polyester business suit rose from the defendant's table and swaggered over to the stand. He had a pencil-thin mustache and oily-smelling hair brushed back to cover a balding spot on the back of his head. While the tipstaff was swearing in the witness, Philip asked Sam, "Who is this guy?" "He owns the dodgeball factory. Get him to admit that the dodgeballs his company makes are supposed to be used to hit children." Philip noticed that the entire room had gone quiet. "We're waiting, Mr. Stanislaw," Judge Mon said. He forced himself to his feet, opened his mouth, and tried to sound like a real lawyer. "Good morning, Mr. Nerd," Philip said. "Nerp," the witness corrected him. "My name is Marvin Nerp." "Did you say twerp?" Judge Mon asked. "No," the witness thundered. "Nerp! I said Nerp." Giggles escaped from the back of the courtroom. Mr. Dinkle delivered a cold, hard stare to the rows of school children that advised them it had better not happen again. "Mr. Nerp," said Philip, "do you make dodgeballs?" "My company makes dodgeballs, yes. I'm Chief Executive Officer of the American Dodgeball Company." "What are dodgeballs for?" asked Philip. "What are they for? What a stupid question. They're for playing dodgeball, of course." "Okay," said Philip. "I guess you can leave." The witness looked strangely at Philip, then over at his own lawyer, Mr. Dinkle, who was already on his feet. "Your Honor, I would like to ask a few questions of the witness on cross-examination," said Mr. Dinkle. "If Mr. Stanislaw doesn't mind." "No, I don't mind," said Philip. "Mr. Nerp," said Mr. Dinkle, "thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you're an important man and you're needed back at the factory, where you employ 1/5 of the workforce of this humble city, so I will be brief." It took Mr. Dinkle nearly an hour to be brief. He asked Mr. Nerp questions about the dodgeball factory. He also asked him about charity work. Mr. Nerp testified about how he didn't lay people off during years when his profits were low. He even testified about how something called the capital gains tax was apparently the work of the devil. Philip could not imagine what any of these things had to do with his lawsuit, but he was grateful that Mr. Dinkle had chosen to be brief, and he wondered how long the questioning would have gone on had he not. When Mr. Dinkle was finally done, the judge asked Philip if he had any more follow-up questions for the witness. "Just one," said Philip. Mr. Nerp, are children supposed to use your dodgeballs to hit other children? Yes, answered Mr. Nerp, annoyed. Okay, said Philip, and he sat down. Scattered clapping drifted from the last row of spectator seating. Call your next witness, the judge ordered Philip, sounding like a circus announcer preparing the audience for the next act of the show. Philip picked up the witness list and read the next name. I call Francis Lee Tyson, said Philip. He looked out into the crowd and wondered who it would be. A chair at the defendant's table slid backward, and Coach Tyson stood up. Philip almost wet his pants. Your Honor, he asked excitedly, please may I go to the bathroom? You've already called the witness, young man. Can't you wait? I really gotta go, said Philip. Judge Mon sighed. The court will be in recess for 5 minutes. She banged her gavel and everyone stood. Please remain in the courtroom, except of course for you, Mr. Stanislaw. The second Judge Mon disappeared into her judicial chambers. The courtroom erupted with the sound of gossiping spectators. Philip felt hundreds of eyes on him as he made his way to the door. A group of kids whose parents worked at the dodgeball factory glared at him menacingly. Mr. Race was sitting in the back row closest to the door. He sneered at Philip, his braces shining like jagged shark teeth. Philip yanked the door open so hard he nearly knocked himself over. He stood with his back against it on the other side, trying to remember if he needed to breathe in or out. Last time he had wanted to talk to Coach, at school when BB got out of his car, Philip didn't have the nerve to face him. How could he question Coach now in front of a whole room full of people? Using arrows to mark the way is a circus tradition. Before the Windy Van Houten Circus moves from one town to the next, the 24-hour advance man marks the route with a system of red arrows. It's the only way to make sure the Dancing Bears don't end up in Pittsburgh and the Dancing Bears' food in Cleveland. As Philip looked for the closest bathroom, he wished the upstairs hallway of the Hardingtown County Courthouse were marked with arrows. He finally found the men's room next to the main elevator, the elevator that could take him down to the ground floor, where he could sneak out the back of the building and run away from the whole thing. Philip looked at the men's room door and then looked over at the elevator door. Inside the courtroom, the buzz died down, and the spectators, grateful for the 5-minute stretch, took their seats as Judge Mon re-entered. All rise, the tipstaff said. The judge settled herself and looked over at Philip's empty chair. Where is Mr. Stanislaw? She asked. The courtroom door squeaked open and Philip peeked in. Sorry, ma'am, Philip said. I'm stuck. Holding one hand on his pants zipper and the other on his waist, he reluctantly entered the room. The teeth of his pants zipper were held fast to a piece of necktie that jutted out from his pants. The courtroom shook with laughter. Tipstaff, Judge Mon said, will you please assist Mr. Stanislaw with his predicament? He took Philip into the hallway to help him jiggle the necktie free from the zipper. Don't worry, said the tipstaff. Happens all the time. Philip could hear snickers from the courtroom. They're all laughing at me, though, he said. Just ignore it. Those high-priced lawyers are just trying to get to you. It's not so much the lawyers, said Philip. I just wish my classmates weren't here. It makes it so much harder. That's why Stinky brought 'em. Stinky? Yeah, Stinky Race. Your vice principal. That's what we used to call him when we were all in school. Suddenly, it all made sense. He's the bully who threw the dodgeball at my mom when she was holding up the cheerleader pyramid, said Philip. It was Mr. Race, wasn't it? Well, I didn't see it happen, said the tipstaff. I had my back turned. He pulled at the zipper, but it wouldn't budge. But old Stinky sure got his reward for that dirty trick, didn't he? What do you mean? Asked Philip. Guess which cheerleader landed on him. Philip pictured his mom, younger but not lighter, as she struggled to keep her balance so the pyramid wouldn't fall. She soared forward, then back. Her trusting friends above her were helplessly yanked like kites in the wind. Finally, she lurched forward, stopping mere feet from Stinky. When her knees buckled, Philip could almost hear Stinky scream as he was swallowed in the giant folds of her cheerleading uniform. It took a team of dentists 7 hours to wire Stinky's teeth back together. They've never been able to get him completely straight. He gave a final yank and the cloth finally broke free from the zipper. Hey, there you go, kid. Thanks, Philip flipped the long part of the necktie over his shoulder and carefully glided up the zipper. Stinky's hoping that with your classmates here, you won't have the guts to finish what you started. I promised Sam I wouldn't quit, said Philip. I promised myself. The tip staff straightened Philip's tie. Then I guess you better get back in there, kid. When Philip re-entered the courtroom, Mr. Race gave him another sneer. But this time, Philip sneered right back. Coach was already on the witness stand. The tip staff swore him in. Try to get Coach to admit that he teaches the kids to hit other kids with dodgeballs, Sam advised. Philip stared at the carpet in front of the witness stand. Coach, he began, then lost his train of thought. He knew he had to look brave, even if he didn't feel it. Whenever the Pork Downs racing circus pigs were performing, you could tell the frightened pigs from the confident ones by looking at their tails. The more relaxed a pig was, the curlier his tail. The straight-tailed pig was never first to the delicious slop at the finish line. Philip tried to relax his tail. Mr. Stanislaw, we're waiting for your question, said Judge Mon. Philip forced himself to look at Coach. He seemed different without his whistle and cap. Still scary, but a little less so. Coach Tyson, do we play dodgeball in gym? You know we do. Why? Because this is Hardingtown. Do you tell kids they should use the dodgeballs to hit other kids? Of course, that's how you play dodgeball. Can't we play something else? Not in Hardingtown. Here, we play dodgeball. Philip didn't know what else to ask, so he sat down. Mr. Dinkle asked Coach questions about physical education. Coach talked about how you have to be tough to survive in this world and how playing dodgeball helps toughen kids up. He used terms like gross motor skills and quick reaction times and aerobic workout. He did not mention that the kids sometimes called it slaughter ball, killer ball, or prison ball. Did you ever instruct anyone to throw a dodgeball at Mr. Stanislaw specifically? No, not specifically, Coach answered. Did you ever instruct a student to throw a dodgeball in the face of another student? Mr. Dinkle continued. No. Do you have an opinion as to whether or not Ms. Tyson intentionally hit Mr. Stanislaw in the face with a dodgeball? Well, in my opinion, it was an accident. Could Mr. Stanislaw have avoided the accident? Mr. Dinkle asked. Yes, he could have moved out of the way. Philip felt like a big fat dodgeball had hit him in the stomach. Was all this his fault? Should he have jumped out of the way instead of standing his ground? No, he thought. I can't start doubting myself now. Mr. Stanislaw, do you have any further questions for this witness? Coach scowled. Philip shook his head. Then call your next witness, Judge Mon said. My next witness is B.B. Tyson. B.B. wore a blue dress with tiny pink flowers and a locket on a gold chain. As she went to the witness stand, she suddenly seemed to walk, more like a girl. The tip staff had B.B. put one hand on a Bible and the other hand up in the air. Like the other witnesses, she swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Philip had never been before in a place where only the truth could be spoken. He liked it. He didn't have to consult with Sam about questions for B.B. He knew what he wanted to ask. Why did you hit me in the head with a dodgeball? Objection, said Mr. Dinkle. Lack of foundation and assuming facts not in evidence? Sustained, said the judge. To Philip, they might as well have been speaking pig Latin. Mr. Stanislaw, you'll have to begin by establishing who the witness is. Well, I already know who she is, said Philip. You need to establish who the witness is for the benefit of the court, said the judge. Now let's stop messing around, just ask her who she is. Philip looked at B.B. She was playing with a string hanging from the lace on the sleeve of her dress. Okay, B.B., who are you? State your name for the record, Judge Mon added to speed things along. My real name? She asked. Like on my birth certificate? Yes, your legal name. My name is Barbara Beth Tyson, but nobody calls me that except my grandma. Thank you, Miss Tyson, said the judge. Then turning to Philip, she added, Now you may continue, Mr. Stanislaw. B.B., said Philip, have you ever hit anyone with a dodgeball? Sure, lots of times. Why do you keep doing it? He asked. Because it's gym class and it's dodgeball. I'm supposed to hit other kids. Did you break my glasses? They must have broken when I hit you with the dodgeball, she admitted. Okay, thanks, he said. Philip sat down, and Sam smiled and patted him on the back. I have a few questions on cross-examination, Mr. Dinkle said. Good morning, Barbara. It's a lovely dress you have on. My grandma made me wear it. How old are you, Barbara? He asked. After some hesitation, she answered, I'm almost 13. The reason you're still in 6th grade is because you were held back in your past, isn't that true? Yes. Why did you get held back? He asked. Bibi played with her dress lace. It was a car accident. When I was 7 years old, I busted my back and had to wear a brace, and I couldn't go to school for a long time. And is that the same accident that killed your mother? Yes, said Bibi quietly. Barbara, Mr. Dinkle said, when you threw the ball that allegedly broke Mr. Stanislaw's glasses, you didn't mean to, did you? I didn't mean to break his glasses. You didn't mean to hurt him, right? Bibi was silent. Do you want to know the truth? She asked Judge Mon. Well, that's why we're here, Judge Mon answered. I was mad at him. In the cafeteria, he got meatloaf and peas on me. All the kids saw it, and they were expecting me to pay him back. Objection, said Mr. Dinkle. Your Honor, the witness is going far beyond my question. Oh, be quiet and sit down, said Judge Mon. Continue, Miss Tyson. I didn't mean to hit him in the face, though. When his glasses broke, I was sorry. Why didn't you apologize? Said the judge. I wanted to, but I was afraid my dad would think I was a wussy. He hates wusses. Philip stood up. Do you have an objection? The judge asked Philip. No. I just wanted to tell Bibi I think she's brave for telling the truth. Bibi flipped a piece of hair out of her eyes and beamed. One more thing, she said, looking over at Philip. In the cafeteria that day when you dumped all the food on me, it was my leg. You tripped over my leg. I tripped you. Objection! Mr. Dinkle yelled. Nobody even asked her a question. Sustained. If there are no more witnesses or no more questions for this witness, she may step down. Name your next witness, Mr. Stanislaw. Your Honor, I call myself to the stand. And that's where we'll stop for part 9. So the court case is really getting into the thick of things. They've had several witnesses with Mr. Nerp, the CEO of the Dodgeball Company, Coach Tyson, Bibi's been on the stand, Mr. Dinkle, the defendant's lawyer, has been asking questions on cross-examination. But now it's getting very serious as Philip himself is going to take the witness stand. If you want to see what happens, you'll need to join us for part 10 of the Stupendous Dodgeball Fiasco. Bye.